Welcome everyone to the first of hopefully a regular series of live streams with two of my friends, Cameron Redmond and Stephen Murphy, all Irishmen, even if they live in Spain and England respectively at the moment. Rich coming from someone who's planning on moving back to Utah.
Well, you were in America, so
yeah, for 2 years, and hopefully we'll be coming back soon as well once the American visa system is the craziest thing ever.
Left Ireland.
Yeah, it's the mid 19th century all over again. Sorry for the dark humor there, for those who actually get that joke. But yeah, just to explain the name, it just means tree friends, os Gaelga. And for those who are wondering what's Triúr and not tree, Irish is kind of weird. We actually have two counting systems, one for people and one for everything else, which throws off a lot of people. But be it as it may, what we'll do is, of course, like as you know, of course, like this is my channel, so Captain Obvious, I have a channel. I run the Scriptural Mormonism channel, but Cameron has a channel. This is the way. I'll link to that in the show notes, as does Stephen Murphy, aka the Murph, with Mormonism with the Murph. And I'm sure, like most people who will be watching this either live or later after the live stream, actually know at least the two of us, not necessarily you, Cameron. You're kind of still relatively new. So what we'll do is, like, Stephen, how about you just give a brief introduction to yourself and your background and anything you want to share. Then Cameron, you can do that as well. And then I'll just kind of give a brief spiel as well. And then we can discuss some of the topics we'd like to discuss. Of course, we are live. So if anyone in the comments wants to submit a question, feel free to. If we have time, we'll address it. Or you want some topic discussed as well. It'll be just largely, like, say, some topics we agree on, but like some shooting the bull as well, and some random stuff that comes up as well. So it's going to be more like, say, a fun stream, if you will, as opposed to like a very technical issue we might deal with on the regular podcast episodes and so forth. So, Stephen, if you want to give an introduction to yourself, and then Cameron.
Sure, yeah. So, I'm Stephen Murphy, otherwise known as the Murph. As you said, my YouTube channel is called Mormonism with the Murph. In a nutshell, I was born and raised in the church, grew up in Northern Ireland, spent part of my upbringing, my childhood in England. I grew up very orthodox, a very traditional home, had a strong testimony growing up. I experienced a faith crisis after I mission. I encountered critics like Grant Palmer, Sandra Tanner, Dan Vogel, then was watching a lot of Mormon stories and read through all Mormon Think. And as I grew up with, we talked about this before we hit record, views of like Latter-day Scripture, like the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants is like infallible, inerrant, the literal words of God. I viewed prophets as infallible, that they could never be wrong about a doctrine. I viewed Book of Mormon geography as hemispheric and that all Native Americans descend from the Lamanites. And I think some of those views, as well as like my views of church history, I'd read the book Our Heritage, and I did go through the Doctrine and Covenants in seminary, but that was kind of like my understanding of church history, as well as the Joe Smith movie. So I feel in some ways those things kind of set me up to have a bit of a faith crisis. But anyway, I went through a loss of faith. I left the church for about a year or so, and then I actually had spiritual experiences and some engagement with apologetics that brought me back to the church. And then since being back, I've been sort of navigating between, okay, how do I view this topic, or how do I reshape this paradigm of prophets in Scripture? So back in 2022, I decided that I wanted to create a YouTube channel to confront certain controversial church history, truth claim topics. I wanted to try to be as fair and balanced as I can. And I typically bring on a lot of either faithful scholars or historians, and also do my own episodes as well. And actually, it turns out, Robert, you're one of the first people that I interviewed and collaborated with. So it's kind of fun to collaborate again. So that's basically my channel. I'm mostly focused on church history, truth claim stuff. I sometimes do recent church news, and that's my channel. If you enjoy it, go check out Mormonism with the Murph and subscribe.
Yeah, in fact, the first episode we did was actually on a topic which is one of my favorite topics, early LDS Christology, namely whether early LDS theology was a form of modalism.
Yeah. Even to this day, I've got lots of people praising that episode. It was a good deep dive, and it was fun because that was a big question mark that I had. And I feel like since then, I've sort of resolved that issue, or at least the criticism's been severely challenged.
Yeah, since then, did you actually see the two-part episode I did with two-part debate, I should say, with Adam Stokes on whether early LDS Scripture taught modalism? We kind of dealt with a couple other topics. No, you should.
Because I think Adam, you thought about having me as a moderator. How did it go?
I thought it went very well. I mean, it was very cool. Like both, although like Adam and I think we're dead wrong. We're actually very good friends, and he's done a lot of good articles with Interpreter. He's like a member of the Elijah Message Church. So unlike say Dan Vogel, he believes in Book of Mormon historicity and so forth. He just believes it teaches modalism, and their scriptures
Okay.
are explicitly modalist. Like they have their own articles of faith where it does explicitly teach modalism.
That's
But we're actually
interesting.
hoping to have like a debate or two because we don't because both myself and Adam both know Greek and Hebrew. We're actually hoping to have like a series of debates in the new year on whether the Greek New Testament and the Septuagint / Hebrew Bible teaches either modalism as well as Unitarianism. So, but yeah, it was a two-part debate. So we kind of dealt with some of the topics we dealt with, like Mosiah 15, but we also dealt with, say,
Right.
some other topics as well, with in a different angle. So yeah,
And I know everybody thinks that they're the winner of the debate, but did you win?
I'd like to think I did because Adam did say in the first debate he did better in the second debate. He wasn't as in assertive, and what I mean by that, I don't mean like being a jerk, but like pushing back and stuff like that. He just let things go, and a lot of people did think he had no answers to it. I don't
Oh,
think
right.
that's the case, but like in the second, it was much more not combative, but it was obviously like more forceful, and that was good. But
Right.
yeah, everyone thinks they won the debate. Personally, I think I did, just largely because I think the case for modalism relies on a lot of special pleading and question begging.
Hmm.
But to be fair, Adam, he basically like all but dissertation. He's written like a book on Hebrew Bible, on wisdom theology and stuff like that. So he's a really smart guy. Yeah, I would say like his case is better than Dan Vogel's,
Right.
because he actually knows the relevant texts and languages. I I personally believe exegetically my case holds up better, and it's gonna be really interesting when we do Greek New Testament over like one or two debates in the new year. So.
And you said you and him were friends before you did the debate.
Oh
So
no, we're
meet
still friends. Yeah, no, yeah, we're still. He's been on my podcast before. He's actually published a few things with the Interpreter Foundation. Like last week, he published one on the reception of a section in the Or LDS German edition of the Bible, and he's done some stuff on race in the scriptures and so forth. So he's actually someone maybe you would want to consider having on your podcast sometime as well. So
yeah. It's quite funny that he was arguing for modalism, but as a believer in the Book of Mormon.
yes,
Usually it's critics that like to argue for modalism, saying that Joseph Smith's theology of God evolved over time with his subsequent first vision accounts.
yeah, and also it made the debate easier for both of us because unlike Dan Vogel, he does not believe that there has to be, and he doesn't really believe that there is like consistency between the Book of Mormon, Book of Moses, Lectures on Faith, Doctrine and Covenants.
Mm.
At least for the early revelations that his group accepts, particularly the Book of Mormon and the earliest revelations and some aspects of the Pearl of Great Price, he would agree that there's a greater level of consistency or univocality than a Dan Vogel or a Senator Tanner or Melody Charles, which actually made the debate easier for both of us because we did not. It wasn't the case like, well, I believe he contradicted himself when he was making up the 1832 First Vision and so forth. He actually believes all First Vision accounts up until maybe 1842 teach modalism. He actually believes.
How does he reconcile then by like particularly the Nauvoo years where it's very?
Oh no, he believes like in 1842 with the Book of Abraham there's a radical shift. So up until 1842 with the final few chapters of the Book of Abraham, it was basically a form of modalism. But 1842 there's a hard shift towards non-modalism.
Even like the lectures on faith, they're like the
Yeah,
Book of Moses with the Father and the Son conversing in the pre-world existence, or like
he believes it's an internal monologue. So it's poetic language, like how if you have struggles with your own inner temptations, you might have like an inner monologue. You should do this. No, I should do this. He believes that's the case for.
Okay.
But Satan is also present in the same way. So unless you believe like Satan is also in an internal devil. But yeah, you might want to check out those two debates. It was pretty good. But yeah. But I'm looking forward, like, say, the forthcoming stuff where we focus on the original language text in the Bible. That should be interesting as well. But yeah, maybe you can actually go kind of circle back to some modalism stuff if you want to. But Cameron, I'll let you introduce yourself, including your channel and your background in the church and anything else you want to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, just to, I guess, give a long story short, I was also born in the church, raised in the church. I served a mission. I am currently 29 years old, living in Spain, as Robert said earlier, with my wife and my two children, my little 3-year-old daughter and 9-month-old son. So life is very busy. We just recently moved. So I was serving as a bishop in a ward about an hour and a half away from where we are now. But we've just recently moved to Benidorm, which a lot of people are familiar with. And so now we just had our first Sunday today in the new little branch that we're a part of, and it's only about 40 people strong. So it's going to be an exciting new chapter of our lives. So we're quite excited about that.
Moved to this new branch.
Yeah. Well, so we moved about 6 months ago, but the old stake we were in had asked me to keep serving for a while they were figuring some things out. And so we've moved house about 6 months ago, but we just moved to the new branch today. Today was our first day there. So it was quite nice.
Cameron, they released you as soon as they saw the channel. They're like, gotta get rid of this guy.
They're like, oh, apologetic, get him out here. But actually, that's kind of something funny that I was thinking about earlier. We were talking about it a little bit before we started recording. Is like, I do feel like there's like this kind of like negative view about apologetics, like almost like that's maybe not a good way to go, or now I can understand why, because I think some apologetics can get very controversial. But personally, I do believe that, like, as members of the church, we should be more involved in defending the faith, and I think some of the apostles, especially Jeffrey R. Holland, have given a lot of talks recently about this kind of idea of like, don't be afraid to defend the faith. So anyway, hopefully that's not the reason for the release, but Robert, your mic's off.
Yeah. Sorry, I just noticed that boomer tech. But it's even like in the New Testament where we're called upon to give an apology or defense of our faith. And like if you read section 71, the Lord commands Joseph and Sidney, and by extension everyone else, to like give sound reasons for the hope that we have and the truth of the gospel. It doesn't mean we have to become scholars and become bibliophiles and know Greek and Hebrew and all that jazz, but at the same time to be informed about what you believe and how to defend it when necessary.
Yeah. No, definitely. Exactly. That's exactly what I believe. I believe the importance of giving an answer for the faith and the hope that we have. So I mean, that kind of ties back into my story, is that I was born and raised in Ireland, lived in Dublin my whole life. Very little did I come across any kind of anti to the LDS Church or our doctrine, just silly things, sound bites out of South Park or something silly like that. It wasn't until my mission that I really encountered the idea that there is like anti out there, that people are like legitimately actively trying to prove that the Book of Mormon is wrong and trying to prove that Joseph Smith was a false prophet. And so that's where my taste for apologetics began, just wanting to find answers and defend those things. As Robert said earlier, my channel's fairly new. I'm just kind of getting into this now, just starting off. I think it's pretty evident in how lightweight I look compared to these two guys with all their books behind them, and there's my little stack right there. But it's early days for me, but I am very excited. It's something that I felt a passion for a long time. Even before my mission, I was never afraid to bear my testimony or tell people about like what was different about the church. I had a lot of friends that were just very curious. And so I was never afraid to like talk about the church and explain why we're different or explain what we believe. And then that kind of grew on the mission into not only explaining it, but wanting to defend it, and wanting to defend it from a point of view, not only using like the scriptures and history, but also just like more common sense. It was always my kind of approach. And so in recent months now, I've been home from my mission a couple of years, obviously, but in recent months and years, I've just felt a strong desire to be more involved in this world of apologetics. And long story short, just in the last couple of weeks, I just said, you know what, it's time I bite the bullet and just jump on the bandwagon here. And so I decided to start my channel, This Is the Way. Obviously talking about Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. And so that's a little bit about me. I have a couple of videos up on my channel. My channel is probably a little bit different to, for example, the Murphs, and definitely different to the scholar who is Robert. It's more so just kind of insights about doctrine, and I do plan to do like videos defending the faith and rebuttals and things like that, and definitely would like to have more debates and having people on. So my channel will be a little bit of a mix of everything, but it is early days, but lots of plans for the future. So
yeah, and you've also done collaborations with both of us. I know you and Murph actually had a very interesting episode discussing like your background and your experiences in greater detail, and that's a pretty recent episode on the playlist. And also, we actually did an episode together discussing the theology of Mary or Mariology, because I'm perhaps the LDS apologist and scholar who's done the most work on that particular topic. So it's always fun to justify all the hours I've spent studying that particular area. So, but yeah, thanks for that. And if you're on this channel, you probably already know who I am. But if you don't, my name's Robert Bollin. Unlike these two gents, I'm actually a convert to the church. I've been a baptized Latter-day Saint for like 19 and a half years now. Been studying Mormonism and world religions since almost 23 years. I have degrees in anthropology and theology. I'm also a trained accounting technician, and for the last 4 years now, being paid full-time to work in Mormon studies, researching primary historical sources, and helping write articles. So I actually get paid to do a lot of this, and it's what I do on the side as well for a hobby. Strange beast I am. So, and I run the Scriptural Mormonism podcast and also the Scriptural Mormonism blog as well, where largely I discuss exegesis and theology and share excerpts of books and articles that I think LDS would be particularly interested in as well. So, trying to disseminate that kind of information to a wider audience as well. So, yeah, that's me. 37 years of age, currently live in Tralee, although I'm hoping to go back to Holiday, Utah, or somewhere near there. But the US visa system is crazy stupid. So, until then, I'm working Utah hours at the moment, Monday to Friday, but no complaints. I get paid to be a Mormon studies nerd. So,
how are you finding being back in Ireland?
I like it. I mean, I think it started to snow around a few days ago in Holiday, and I like snow on Christmas Day, but that's it. So at least I'll avoid like the 5 months of nonstop snow. Kind of do miss it, but at least I get to see my dad for the first time in 2 years in person. A few other teens, kind of see my very small branch in Tralee, which is nice, and all that jazz. So there's pros and cons. But I do miss the States for a number of reasons.
I served my mission in Canada, and the snow was cool for like the first month, but then I just got so sick of it. Like, because your shoes would just get so dirty. I hated driving in the snow, especially if it was fresh snow. But it would be like you said, like 5 or 6 months of the year with snow. Whereas here, like, we're lucky if we get snow for a couple of days.
And what's rather interesting, and this is going to be lost on a lot of Americans, is like, I'm not sure what it was like in the north, but when I was living in Dublin, even if it snowed for like, say, 5 minutes, the entire public transport system would close down. There would be pandemonium. They have no idea how to deal with even like a trickle of snow.
We had like, I'll never forget when I was about 15, we had like probably like 5 inches of snow. Literally the place shut down like for 2 weeks.
Oh yeah.
Couldn't cope at all. Like schools shut, buses were closed, trains were closed. Like it just absolute pandemonium over a couple of inches of snow. So yeah, it's definitely a very different experience. I know when I started my mission in Indiana, I was in a place called Plymouth for I think it was my first Christmas? No, my second Christmas. And I think it was like -25 a couple of the days, and that was just like unreal, like absolutely crazy temperatures. So although Ireland has a lot of rain, at least it didn't get too cold.
That's true. And Kranzag in the chat says, in Arizona, I barely remember what to do with rain. So it could be worse.
Yeah. I mean, I can't complain too much now. I live in Spain. I think it was like 25 here today. So I can't, I'm not in a position to complain at all.
Yeah, I was actually sure.
Like, it has been cloudy and like drizzly like the last couple of weeks. I don't think I've even seen sunshine in like a couple of weeks.
Yeah, in Utah, it's like usually in Celsius between like 25 to 32, 33. And I was explaining to some people a heat wave in Ireland and the UK would be like, say, something like 18 or 19 degrees Celsius. I think that's about 62. And it's like, you poor creature, no wonder you struggle. You were raised in a refrigerator.
Okay. My wife, she's from Mexico. And so she went back at the end of September for a few weeks, and she struggled so much with the heat. Like, I feel like she's climatized, because I think it was probably around 30 degrees when she was there. And because Mexico, like where she lives, they're not super well off. They don't really have air conditioning or anything. So I remember whenever I went out there right before the wedding, I really struggled. I was like, man, we need AC or something.
Oh, well, that's the introduction. So we actually have some topics, but I'm sure we can shoot the bull a bit as well if we want to. But one of the topics we wanted to discuss was, of course, the movie Heretic. I still have not seen it, but Stephen did post on his YouTube channel a 12-minute video going through it because he actually watched it, and your wife also watched it with you as well. So I think that would be kind of interesting to share her perspective as well. And of course, like, this is a big movie because, of course, Hugh Grant appears in it, and say what you will about his acting skills, he actually does this. He still has a draw when it comes to being an actor and stuff like that. Yeah. So it's going to be popular just for that, but also like any movie that dumps on religion in any way, especially in our society, will get a lot of ratings. So how about, I know you have like a 12-minute video and people can check that out, but how about you kind of give your perspective anyway here on it? Sure. And what did your wife, who she's a believer in that thing, but she doesn't seem to like have the same interest in like saying Mormon studies and controversy as you do. What did she think about it as well? If you want to share that as well.
Well, see, it's interesting because like I've heard different people who have watched it. I know David Snell did a quick short. Jasmine Rapley did like a 2 or 3 minute video. I saw Don Bradley and his wife's post. So it seems like everyone sort of took different views or interpretations from it. I thought the acting, I thought Hugh Grant was brilliant. I thought he played the role really well. He was very smooth, very articulate, and he came across at first like this very nice man who was interested in religion. And then as it went along, he was kind of like this harsh investigator, or became like this critic of religion who was sort of like deconstructing their faith and challenging them. And it turns out he's, a psychopath. Now, I wanted to go see it just because there was a lot of hype, and I do enjoy a good thriller, a good sort of like psychological horror. I didn't know like too much about it. I didn't really watch a trailer, so I just wanted to go for myself, watch it, see what I think. And like the first half of the movie was basically kind of what I thought. He lured them in to the house, and they were talking about the gospel, and then things started to get a bit kind of creepy, as in like the power went out in his home, but there was a storm going on at the time, and then he invited them in because he was like, "Oh, my wife is here," because they did say, "Oh, we can't come in unless there's another woman present." And he was like, so they got that right. That's quite accurate about mission roles. So then,
in fact, the two sister missionaries, they're actually former members, so I think that would have helped at least get some of these points accurately down pat, if you will.
Yeah, and actually, do you know what was one of the weirdest parts? See the very opening of the movie.
I was gonna ask you about that. I watched your video, Stephen, and that was one of the parts I wanted to address. Was go ahead anyway. I'll let you jump in.
It was honestly the very opening scene was them talking explicitly about condoms and porn and sex and watching a pornographic video. And I did say in my video, like, look, missionaries were young people too. Certainly I was around missionaries and had chats with companions where you maybe talked about some inappropriate things with girls and sex, but never that explicit. It was just like, it was a bit over the top. I think they were really trying to like give the message that like, oh, missionaries are secretly talking about like porn a lot, but it was weird, especially it was on a public bench as well.
And so didn't one of the sister missionaries say like it was a faith promoting experience or something like that, or something weird?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember because I didn't record it or anything, but it was something like she was watching a porn video and then she could see the person just look like lifeless or soulless, and that was sort of like a testimony to her the church was true. And it was just like, what? But I think they were trying to make it come across like that's ridiculous as well. Like Mormons have silly reasons for having.
This is one of my problems. This is one of my problems with when they portray the church, and it's the same with like so many stuff you see now, like that the Mormon wives, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, or whatever that one was.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like media, they always try to make it out like, oh, Mormons are really like their lives behind the scenes are really inappropriate. It's all about sex. It's all about like all these worldly things that clearly like the church's doctrine is so the opposite of. And like that's what it really. I've been inspired by your breakdown, Stephen. I'm gonna go watch the movie myself, and I might do a little breakdown on my channel of it. But I just think like one of the things that really gets under my skin is like when they portray LDS people, like actually once you get to know them, they're all about sex, they're all about drinking, they're all about drugs, no different than anything else that you see in the world. When like our doctrine literally is the opposite of all those things. And it's like so undermining, it's so frustrating because it's like not reality. Like don't get me wrong, I agree with you. I think like missionaries are young, immature. Sometimes they might talk about things, but in my whole mission experience, I never had that experience where someone was just openly talking about these things in such a graphic manner.
Not that explicit, especially from sister missionaries.
Yeah, especially, yeah. So anyway, when I heard you breaking down that part, I was like, oh yeah, shocker there that they're trying to make it out like these LDS missionaries are really just so obsessed with sex and porn and all these ridiculous things.
Yeah, like, and I don't have like a transcript. I didn't go into the movie with like a pad of paper and taking down notes and breaking down. So I'm just going off like what my impression was. But it seemed like when he was talking with the missionaries, when they were trying to teach him the first lesson, that he was just asking lots of questions. I think they were trying to paint him as this intelligent investigator who's bringing up controversial things about the church's history, polygamy, the sisters coming across like they weren't really aware of it. They seemed uncomfortable. And then later, like as things got weird, because they wanted to leave. They wanted to leave the house because the power went out. They were kind of like, we want to meet your wife. And I think he was starting to ask more like personal probing questions, and it just got a bit uncomfortable. So later, they followed him into like this big library room because they couldn't get out. They couldn't get out through the window, and there was no signal. They thought it was because of the storm, but I think he had like metal bars or something around like in the ceiling or something, so it blocked signal coming through. But he kind of went through like this presentation just trying to like deconstruct religion and just showing that all religions are just like iterations or copies or remixes of prior religious traditions and sacred texts, almost comparing it to like board games. So I kind of felt like, oh, is that a message they're trying to put across? And the missionaries just seeming almost like, naive and blindly believing, and they don't know all the complexities about religion, or they're just kind of gullible and brought up in it. So I sort of thought like they were implying that a little bit. And then things did get a bit crazy. Like he, proper psychopath. There's later where they have to go through two doors. One leads down to like this basement. It's really dark. And then, so the first half of the movie was kind of what I was anticipating. But then there's like this woman who's like a prophetess down there wearing like these white robes, and she was like crouched in a weird position. And I was like, what the frig? And he talked about his wife making a blueberry pie, so they could smell a blueberry pie whenever they came in, but there was like no wife or no blueberry pie. But then she had a blueberry pie. She went to the table, sat down at the table, then she started to eat it, and Hugh Grant was like speaking to them as it was happening. And then she died, and then he was basically saying to them that like a miracle is going to happen. So but he was almost trying to make a point that like all religions are false, miracles don't happen, but he's gonna like naturally create one. So anyway, later the doorbell rings. They go up to the door, trying to look through, trying to scream for help, and then when they come back, the woman has changed position, and one of the sisters is like, "Oh, she wasn't in that position before. Like something's not right." And then the other sisters were like, "No, it's fine." And they were trying to light a fire to see if that like smoke could come through a pipe. And then the prophetess awoke and shared sort of like her afterlife experience, what she saw. But then Hugh Grant comes down and he kills one of the sister missionaries as she kind of stands up to him. So that kind of makes it a little bit complex, because I remember my wife said to me, yes, he was sort of deconstructing religion, but then at one point, one of the sisters does sort of stand back or stand up and like challenge Hugh Grant. So, you can maybe say that, okay, they had some nuance that wasn't just fully deconstructing religion. You had her standing up to Hugh Grant. But then one of the sister missionaries gets killed. And then the other sister is on her own. And then she kind of works out what is going on. And she discovers, this is the really creepy part, down like these catacombs. So she went down further into the basement, and there's all these creepy dark rooms with different religious symbols. And then she finds these cages of women who are like, locked up in cold, weak conditions. And she then realized that like his point is that the only real religion is like control. That makes sense. And I took from that like, oh, are they trying to make the point that like all religions are man-made are about like controlling and manipulating their followers, which is sometimes something like rhetoric you would see from ex-Mormons. And then at the end, she fights him, she stabs him in the neck, and then there's this weird scene because then he later finds her, stabs her, and then he says something along the lines of like, sister, pray for me. And then she's like, oh, we know prayer doesn't work. Studies have shown it, but it's nice to pray for people. So it almost seemed at the end like she was sort of like denying the faith and that prayer works. But then one thing my wife said to me was she also thought they were maybe trying to present Hugh Grant as like this articulate critic. But if you go too far in deconstructing religion, that you can become very like psychopathic in a way. And she thought like at the end, the fact that like the other companion sort of like miraculously rose, killed Hugh Grant, almost seemed maybe like a miracle. So it's like they were trying to undermine that miracles are real, because the woman that moved was just another woman. So it was kind of like a magic trick or an illusion. But then at the end, it was kind of confusing because it seemed like maybe it was trying to suggest miracles are real. But I more took from it that it seemed to be more an attack on religious belief. But, people can take their own interpretations from it. So that was my sort of summary. The movie itself was like, I maybe give it 3 or 4 stars. Like, it was definitely worth watching. It was a bit weird and a bit gruesome for my liking. Don't know if I really watch it again, but that's sort of my take on the movie.
Cool.
I like your wife's take on it. Who knows? Maybe that's what the director meant all along. Is like religion is the good thing, and like being overly critical just leads to cynicism and psychopaths. And
Like, I think that's what makes it complicated, because people take different views. I know Don Bradley and his wife saw the sister missionaries as the protagonists, and that they were sort of like the heroes in the story as well, and they showed a lot of courage. And then at the end, they sort of defeated, this critic, this psychopath, in a way. So yeah, like, you could sort of take that from it as well. But it didn't surprise me that ex-Mormons were, the 2 sister missionaries, and I believe the director was ex-Mormon as well. So yeah, that was sort of my general thoughts. And then there's lots of references to like magic underwear as well throughout it, which I thought was just a little bit unnecessary in my view.
It's a pretty easy target, though.
Yeah, it's such an easy target, and it's just a great way to paint us Mormons as weird, even though other religions have their own religious clothing as well that they hold sacred. I felt like it was unnecessary, because it was something that was rarely brought up to me on my mission, but they made it quite a big focus of the movie.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing. And of course, if people want to see your fuller review of 12 minutes, it's on your channel, which is of course linked. So back in October, of course, we had General Conference, and on the second day, the temples were announced. When the temples were announced, I announced to a couple of people I was with, and none for Ireland. And 5 seconds later, Dublin, Ireland was announced, which was a huge shock. So yeah, we're having a temple in the island of Ireland. First of all, who actually saw that coming? I didn't. And secondly, thoughts on where exactly in Dublin will it be, and any other thoughts on Ireland getting the temple, which will be constructed in the next couple of years. So, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in. I think I have a strong position, feeling for Bray. So we know, like the church, when they say like Dublin, Ireland, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be for sure in Dublin County.
And for people who are outside of Ireland, Bray is actually south of County Dublin, in case you want to find that out. So yeah.
Yeah. So so it is. It's fairly close to the county of Dublin itself, but it's the same with like the Rome temple. Like, I think it's not actually in the boundary of Rome. Like,
and the same for London. It's actually quite a distance away from London city itself.
Yeah. And Preston temple is actually in, what's it, Chorley. Chorley. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm gonna throw out there Bray, because I think Bray is a beautiful place. There's lots of beautiful rolling hills, and I can see the temple being slotted on one of those hills. I was shocked, like actually almost fell out my chair. I've put some notes together I was going to do a little video about like Irish boy reacts to like Irish LDS temple or something.
Didn't your wife take a video of you and you were just
yeah.
You were just
yeah, you were gobsmacked. I think to be fair, I think like everyone who was listening live who's from Ireland or served their mission in Ireland was the same as well. So
freaking out. So I usually don't go on social media on Sundays. Only every now and then if I need to like check something or respond to something. But just that day, for the news that it was, I went on and my social media was exploding. Like not just people sending me stuff, but so many people I know freaking out about the temple. So it was such huge news. It's funny. I was a massive critic. I was a real non-believer. I thought Ireland was never going to get a temple. I was like, Savior's coming again. There's no temple in Ireland. Like, don't worry about it. And anyway, my wife had like the strongest impression. She said, I think they're going to announce a temple in Dublin. I was like, yeah, you're mad. And anyway, so President Nelson starts to speak, and normally he announces the temples at the end, but this time he announced them at the beginning. And I was like washing my hands or something. And anyway, President Nelson starts to speak. So I'm like, okay, here's his talk. So I go to get ready to sit down. And then he starts like, and you can tell he's about to announce the temples. And we're like, oh my goodness, he's doing it now. So I like race over to the couch to sit down. And my wife's like, I want a video. And I was like, no, don't. No, she's like, no, I'm videoing this. I think I'm going to get your reaction to it. And I was like, yeah, sure. At that point, I was kind of like 50-50, like maybe, I was starting to feel it as well. And I think it was like the 4th or 5th temple he announced. And I literally like, it's like everything around me just went black. I was like, what is happening? And so anyway, extremely exciting news. I couldn't believe it. It took like a week or two for it to actually sink in that it's actually happening. I'm very excited. Obviously, living in Spain, you know, we have the Madrid temple, the Barcelona temple was announced a couple of years ago, so that's on the way too. But I'm extremely excited for the idea of like when I go home to visit family, like that there's a temple that we can attend there. I hope that, because I know some temples when they're built in specific places, that they kind of integrate like local iconography and like that kind of symbolism and stuff into the temple itself. So like I'm really hoping they do that with like imagine the Irish temples just full of like shamrocks and the Celtic swirl and like all those kind of things. I think it would be so cool. So I know I was on my mission for when they opened the Indiana temple, and Indiana, I forget the name of the flower now, but the state flower was like integrated throughout the whole temple, like on the doorknobs. It was like the state flower and stuff. So I'm like hoping that's what they do for the Irish temple. Anyway, absolutely beside myself, so excited. But I will give a shout out to a friend of mine who we probably all know, Thomas Hulton. He put up something, and it really caused me a lot of like thinking and pondering about it. He said he put up a thing saying basically how happy he was about the temple, and his more or less his quote was, "The Son of Man will have a place to call home in Ireland," something like that. And actually made me emotional reading it. But I was thinking about it, and the more I thought about it, I mean, this is kind of my take on it, and I suppose this will kind of be my main message if I do the reactionary video to it. Is that for me, I personally don't believe that Ireland is receiving a temple because of the faithfulness of the saints or because the church is growing so rapidly there. I think Ireland is receiving a temple because we are legitimately preparing the world for the return of the Savior. And the Savior needs a dedicated home for him to gather the saints of Ireland to visit them when he returns. And like, I really felt strongly like that was the purpose of the temple. It's not because the like church is booming in Ireland. It's not because the members are just so amazing, like going to Preston every second weekend to do temple work. I truly think it's like President Nelson's like, we're legitimately preparing the world for the Savior to come back, and this is like one of the necessary steps for the people of Ireland. So that's my little 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I'll give my 2 cents, and maybe Stephen can actually hop in as well. But one thing that to realize, like when it comes to say the island of Ireland, because like there's 2 countries, although there should be one, but not bringing politics here. Back in May, in the Republic, until very recent, I think like back in May, there was like a small district which basically covered the Limerick, Tralee, Galway area, and the rest of the country, which was the Dublin, Ireland stake, and of course, like Northern Ireland is covered by an entire stake as well. But they actually merged the district and stake in the Republic to form a moderately sized stake as well, covering the entire Republic, which is about 5 million people. And I think there's about 3 million people in Northern Ireland. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
I think it's closer to 2.
Okay, yeah. Well, okay, let's say 2 million people. So, and according to like the statistics in the church on the island itself, so both the North and the Republic, there's on the records about 9,000 members of the church. But if there's like a 30% activity rate, that would like say maybe 3,000 members on a Sunday to Sunday basis. I think that would be more or less fair to say, at least
I said
regular.
Right, probably.
So like numerically, the church has always struggled. I mean, I was rereading the thesis on the history of the church from 1937 to 1968. That came out in 1969 by BYU, by Barlow. And even then, that was when the church was really, really tiny. A friend of mine back in the US, her dad served in the mid 60s in Ireland as well. Whereas basically, at least in the South, most members were actually immigrants from Germany who were beef butchers and stuff like that, Morgeleys and stuff like that. Perhaps you've heard of them, Cameron. One of their husbands served as branch president in the only branch in Dublin for like 23 years straight. But so
that's why they built the Finglas building, was for like a majority of like German immigrants there.
Yeah. So this is huge because like the church in Ireland, although it's been around since like 1837, so it's been established for like 187 years. It's always been very, very tiny, even at the best of times. Like in Dublin, where I was baptized and lived for a couple of years, there's like 4 wards, but with the exception maybe Consilla ward, which you grew up in, Phoenix and then Consilla once it moved, which is like 130 people thereabouts. The branches are like, the wards like usually just like moderately sized branches by like most other standards. So, and I'm not sure what's like in the north. I've only been up in Northern Ireland once.
But same.
Yeah.
In my ward, it's pretty much become a branch. Like before we moved here to England a year ago, I'd say the average attendance was 50 to 60. Now, the current ward we're in isn't much bigger, like maybe close to maybe 90 to 100. So it's not huge, but yeah, wasn't big attendance to the
Yeah, so like numbers wise, like the church is pretty stagnant in Ireland, unfortunately. So, but the very fact that there will be a temple announced, I knew that there was plans for it when they merged the district and the state in the south, because you have to have like certain numbers and certain things that have to be ticked off before you're even considered for a temple. But I thought, so I always thought even before this, like there might be a temple someday. It's probably in Belfast because that's where like most members are in the island and stuff like that. But maybe like say in my 60s or 70s. So maybe if I don't see it, maybe my kids or grandkids will see it. Not that I'm pessimistic, it's just like I'm pretty realistic. You know, I just didn't see that happening for a while. So
see, I think with me, like for years and years, members of the church have been like in my state talking about a temple in Ireland and like let's have a fast for it and praying for a temple, and you know, it just never came. I think part of me wasn't super surprised because of the temple announced in Scotland. When the temple was announced in Scotland, and wasn't it? It was Birmingham before.
Yeah, Scotland, like a year previously as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So then when the one was announced in Scotland, I was like, hold on, you've got on this island now 4 temples. There's going to be, and 1 in Scotland. So I was like, come on, there's got to be 1 over here. Now, like when me and Cameron did our episode, I absolutely loved like the temple trips. I liked that it was a big trip that you go on a ferry, you take a coach, and you go for a few days to the temple. So I think those are like special experiences. But on the flip side, like the hard thing is like in my youth, I was maybe lucky if I made it to the temple probably once every 2 years, to be honest. I think I went at age 12, 14, 16, and then right before my mission when I got my endowments. So like the good thing about being here in England is like we're 45 minutes from the temple, so you can go way more frequently. So like that's a really nice thing for members of the church as well. And like as you were saying, Cameron, I kind of made a joke on Facebook about it, but I was like, you know, until there's a temple being built in Ireland, the second coming's still a long ways away. And then I put up a post being like, this is a sign. The work is hastening. We're getting closer to the end. This is one of the things on the checklist right before the Savior returns, a temple in Ireland.
Yeah, I would actually agree with Tom Holton, who, by the way, hopefully will come on the podcast to give an overview of the history of the church in the island of Ireland, because there's going to be a lot of interest in that now, especially with the temple. But be that as may, personally, I think in terms of like where it may be built, maybe Bray, because that's pretty, it's a pretty nice area. I don't think it may be as expensive as Dublin City. Personally, if you were to gun against my head, I would say like it'll be closer to like Dublin Airport in the north of Dublin, because it would be one of the things for temples is like it still has to be pretty accessible, even if it's a distance away. And with the airport there, you can fly there from Belfast, you can fly there from Shannon, you can fly there from even Kerry Airport, and I'm guessing maybe Cork as well. And also, like for Belfast, you can always get the train to Euston Station or one of the other stations.
Like an hour and a half. Like I actually think Dublin's a good location. I thought it might have been maybe somewhere like in the middle, maybe like Newry or Dundalk. But I think Dublin's good because you got people like yourself in Tralee or people in Limerick that Dublin's more central, and but like an hour and a half isn't that much of a drive, really. Considering
in comparison, like say the distance one would have to do, like even from Belfast to like say either Preston or London. To get to Preston or London itself would take like at least half a day, most of the day. So at the very most, you would have to like. That's because like most of the temple trips, you would have to like say go for a weekend type of thing as opposed to like a one-day thing with all the travel. So I mean at least
even here in Spain. We have the Madrid temple, and then we'll have the Barcelona temple. But for like the area I'm in, southeastern Spain, it's still a 5-hour drive to both locations. Madrid's 5 hours away. Barcelona's a bit more, closer to 6 hours. So yeah, I think on the island of Ireland, we're pretty spoiled because no matter where the temple will be, or relatively close compared to other places. I did for a while. I thought we might lose it to the north, just because I feel like the concentration of members in the north is like more dense.
To the north.
That's just like we lost those 6 counties.
Yeah, the southerner side is coming out at me now, but yeah, just because the concentration is like higher in the members there, because like obviously it's less population, more members,
and of course like one of the important things, and I think this will be like an initial struggle at least. I hope I'm wrong, but I say this will be the struggle, trying to get like members who are familiar with the liturgy of the temple, being regular participants. Yeah, you can get some missionaries to do it, but like it will be probably difficult. So maybe if I
like
wasn't sure,
temple workers,
temple workers, because there'd be some in Dublin, but maybe like say when it comes to say young retired couples in the north, maybe like try to like urge them all, maybe like consider like say either moving permanently to the north of Dublin, or at least maybe like doing a house swap or something like that, even for like a 6-month period, because we will be, although it's going to be in Dublin, so it's going to be in the Republic, I think we will still be dependent on members in the north to help.
For sure.
Because like maybe numerically we have more, but like concentration wise, there's much more in the Belfast stake than there would be in the entire Republic, and we're larger in population and area as well. So I think that would be like, say, it would be interesting to see like how that overcomes. Now, hopefully it won't be too much of an issue, but even if it's a small temple and there won't be like many endowment sessions each day, still trying to get like all the roles filled, that I think will be, hopefully it won't be, that might be a problem. So.
Yeah, I do.
I was thinking the same thing as well. I reckon it will be a smaller temple.
Yeah, and I do think as well the demographic counts as well, because I know right now, from whisperings I heard, one of the reasons why I thought a temple could come sooner than later is like I know like a good family friend of ours, the Fagans have been called. Ray Fagan was called to the temple presidency in Preston, and so a lot of people were kind of whispering like that's for preparation because he'll help with the temple in Ireland and yada yada yada. And I know that a lot of senior couples now in the stake are feeling more of it, like we need to get to the temple, we need to get kind of like learned up on these things. I know my grandmother in particular feels she's been spending a lot of time in the temple, and I think she was saying that they what's the term when they watch over the session, when they it's escaped me now, but they like initiate the session, whatever. Anyway, she was saying they're temple workers now and they're learning how to do that kind of stuff. So I think there is that there. But Stephen, I don't know what you think, but I know for the demographic in the Dublin stake, like the thing is, again, going back to what Robert was saying, is that I feel most of the Dublin stake, and I'm not too familiar with like the other branches that have been pulled in now to the stake, but the overall demographic is quite young. Mostly like younger families, like younger married couples. Like we don't have a whole load of seniors, so to speak, or retired people. What's the overall demographic, would you say, in the north? Like, do you think there's a bit more there?
Well, in the north, certainly my ward, it's pretty much 90% older demographic. There would be, because I think one of the issues that we're having in Ireland, and it's not just like, I think, inactivity, people like yourself and me, a lot of people are just moving away because there's just not great work opportunities in Ireland. So I think like there is an older demographic that could help like to officiate in the temple.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely exciting times. I'm very happy about it, obviously, and definitely was a shock when it was announced.
Yeah, of course, like it won't be like for a couple of years until it's actually constructed. I mean, they still have to I think they still have to find an area in Birmingham to build a temple, and that was announced maybe 2 years ago, and they still have to do work in Edinburgh, wherever in Scotland it was announced. But so I'm guessing like maybe sometime in 2030 thereabouts, even if it's a small temple.
Years away. I think we should put it right in Phoenix Park, next to the zoo. That would be a great location.
Between the zoo and the White House, put it in there.
Yeah, and like how they appropriate, like say certain imagery in the Rome temple. Maybe if we have a statue of Michael Collins or something like that outside.
The Irish savior, yeah.
Or they should put it temple bar area.
Hey, this is false advertising.
Come see the real temple.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting, but I say, as with like say the London Temple and stuff like that, it won't be in Dublin City proper. Even just for the very fact like property costs will be astronomical. So I would say like it'll
Dublin's be crazy expensive.
It is, even at the best times. My mother and her husband and my brother live in the south of Dublin, and it's crazy expensive. And he's like super 150 million Celtic Tiger land sales rich. If you will. But I would say like it's either going to be very close to Dublin Airport for accessibility, or some have actually. I know Derek Black thinks it may be in Bray just because of the land and stuff like that, and it will be very picturesque. But we'll see. I mean, it'll be generally Dublin-ish. Just as London Temple
is like a wee coastal town. I'm pretty sure I've been there.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That'd be nice.
Yeah, someone in the chat did actually ask a question that may be apropos for this. I remember families in Ireland just not big either. Like the cultural aspect from Catholics and American LDS just doesn't transfer to Irish folks. Genuine question for low numbers and whatnot. So in comparison to like say maybe the rest of the world, or like Irish LDS family numbers like smaller or fewer than non non-American non-Irish populations?
I mean, I like, especially coming from the Clonsilla ward, we were kind of known as the young family ward. So I think from what I've heard, Irish Catholics were known for having big families. Like back, back in the 1800s and stuff, like Irish families were big families, 6, 7, 8 kids. I know that even like a generation or two back in my family tree, it's like 8 siblings, those kind of size families. I think there's relative. I mean, compared to the norm, compared to the average, I think Irish LDS people are having big families. Most Irish people I know are having at least 3 or 4 kids. So, compared to the average, I think that's well above the average. I don't know what the average is in Ireland right now. I think it's around the twos, just below the twos, I think.
Well, it's funny because I was thinking like, yeah, I probably would agree the average is probably around 3 or 4, but then 2 of my closest friends, their families, you probably know them, the Gradens and the Hamiltons. The Gradens, there's at least, I think, 6 of them.
They're making up for it. Yeah, we have a few.
And then the Hamiltons has got probably about 7 or 8.
I call them the makeup families. We had the Gallaghers. I think they were like 6 girls and a boy or something like that. And then the Fagans as well. They have a lot. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. I think they have 6.
Almost a dozen.
Yeah.
But I'd say probably like on average per family, probably around 3 or 4 kids.
Yeah, I would say it's more than the natural average, but it's nowhere like say a dozen kids, or like say the old time Irish Catholic where every time you and your wife were intimate, out comes a kid, so you ended up like say maybe 15 or 16. I don't know.
No, I think about 8 kids is the largest that I'm aware of, which is still quite.
Yeah, I think the Ray Fagan and his wife, when they used to be stake president, he used to be stake president for a couple of years. They actually have a large number of kids, and some of the other families, like in the ward I attended in Dublin, same ward as you, Cameron, they had like say maybe 4, 5, 6 kids. Yeah. I think the largest number, but there would be like say Irish Catholic 19th century thing like with more than that, like double digits, except for one family. But yeah.
I think the Fagans have 9, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, so we definitely had a couple of families that were larger, 6 to 9 kids. But I'd say the average now, especially from my experience growing up, was at least 3 or 4. Yeah. So I don't think that's necessarily an issue. Is smaller families like what you see in other countries.
No, at least in the Republic, because I know like the church is a bit more established in the north. I believe, at least on your mom's side of things, Murph, you're a 3rd generation Latter-day Saint, although your dad is a convert. So it kind of goes back a bit in the north. The church, at least in the south, did not really like have any footprint whatsoever, except for very small numbers until like say the mid 70s and 80s. Now, you did have like say some very important stalwarts of the church, like the late Ben O'Farrell, who actually baptized me. He used to be patriarch as well, great guy. He joined in 69 with his wife. The Connollys, who were like a pretty large family in Ireland, they joined in 1970. But the church did not really experience like a large growth, comparatively speaking, until like at least in the Republic, until like say late 70s, early 80s. So
I think it's probably around similar up north as well. Because I know my grand and my mum's dad, I know he was an early, I think, branch president, and the ward in Portadown is a stake centre. So I think they were doing all right, like in maybe the 70s or 80s. But actually, I probably need to look more into the growth of the church, the history in North Ireland.
Yeah, the Barlow thesis actually might be interesting because he focuses largely in the north of Ireland. If you look up, if you can't find it, let me know, I'll send it to you. But like Barlow, History of the Church in Ireland, it was published in the Masters in 1969. He served his mission in Ireland, and his brother is actually the one who wrote the book Mormons in the Bible, if you're familiar with that book.
Way.
Yeah, his brother is Brent Barlow, so yeah.
There's quite a few people that like, like the church is such a small world. Like, do you remember, Todd Compton?
Yeah. In fact, we were talking at MHA last year. We were briefly chatting, and when he found out I was from Ireland, he was talking about his mission experience in Cork. And apparently, this is a funny story. One of the members brought an investigator friend to church, and a few weeks later, it turns out he actually murdered someone.
Oh, whoa. Oh my gosh.
Todd only found out after his mission. It's like, that guy was familiar. Oh yeah, that one of the guys who investigated the church for a while. But yeah, right. No, Todd Compton, who wrote the book In Sacred Loneliness and the Plural Wives of Joseph Smith from like 97, 98. Yeah, he served his mission in Ireland, as did a few other people as well. So
I'm pretty sure that's the main reason I was able to get him on, because like he's been on a few channels. I think he was on Gospel Tangents years and years ago. John Dehlin interviewed him on Mormon Stories, but he's not a frequent guest. But I think it was either Facebook Messenger. I think it was Facebook Messenger. I don't think it was email. But I think the fact I said, "Oh, I'm from Ireland," and then he was like, "Oh, I served my mission in Ireland," and then you could see he was interested. So I was like, "Okay, I've got him."
He was really interesting to find out I was actually from a native Ireland, interest in LDS studies as well. So it's like I disagree with Todd in some things, but like he's, when it comes to say the more critical, not like I don't mean like anti-LDS. I don't believe he's an anti-Mormon, but like more a Dan Vogel-esque. Like I think he's one of the better ones when he comes to like, because he's a bit more negative when it comes to polygamy and Joseph Smith's practice of it than say a Brian Hills or a Don Bradley. But his book, he's like, it's necessary reading even if it's a bit dated these days. So
yeah, I think it was an important work. Yeah, for sure. And Jim Bennett, he didn't serve in Ireland. He served in Scotland. I remember one of his companions was a man from my ward. And then whenever I was on him and Ian's podcast, because Ian, I can't remember if he and Jim were companions, but they were from the same mission. But Ian had him as the companion. So it was fun to just talk and connect with them, like how we're all kind of linked. Like, you know, who would have thought that we would have been connected in this way?
And a friend of mine who's actually bishop in Constable Ward at the moment, Michael Holton, he actually served his mission under Joseph Field and McConkie in Scotland at the same time as Jim and a few other people as well. So
yes, because he was the mission president there. Yeah. Right, that's right. I remember them telling me that.
Yeah,
a small world.
Yeah, no, it is. Kind of surprising. Like it's kind of like 5 degrees of Kevin Bacon, you know, in an LDS context. If you don't know if you don't know someone directly, you probably know them indirectly through like a friend or an acquaintance, you know. So
it's still a pretty small church. Heard of you though. Before I started the channel, I was like, who's this Robert Boylan guy? Because I remember you were commenting either in some of my videos or in some of my posts.
Yeah, it was on the private Facebook group, like some other LDS apologists. You posted something about like say either the first vision and or Joseph's conception of God. So I reached out, I was like, I disagree with you, but like if you ever want to do a Zoom session together, we can discuss that.
And then I was like, what the heck? He's a Mormon theologian and apologist in Ireland? I was like, I've never heard of you. I was like, I'm not the only one. And now there's 3 of us.
To be fair, like although they're not really active a lot on social media except for like YouTube channel, like Michael Holton, if you've ever heard of him, he has like a master's in philosophy. He's actually pretty well read, and his brother Tom kind of runs like a YouTube channel as well. So but yeah, there's a couple like Derek Black. I'm not sure if you ever heard of him, but like he was actually a research assistant for Hugh Nibley when he was in BYU. He's currently in the Triúr ward. So
I didn't know that.
Okay, yeah, it's a small world. In the book that came out posthumously, One Eternal Round, he's actually mentioned and acknowledged for his help in the research for getting some of Hugh Nibley's work ready for publication. So there's some
coming from Ireland.
Sorry?
We may be small. There might be few, but we're good quality.
Quality over quantity. Yeah. It's, as I said, like it's classical quality over quantity because we're definitely lacking quantity.
No, certainly not.
But no, as I said, and I never actually heard of you. So a member of the mission president at the time, Adil Hust, fellow from the north of Ireland, came down and for the day we were meant to do the modalism interview. I kind of asked, like, have you heard of Stephen Murphy? And I think he confused you with your dad.
Dark.
Yeah. So, because I never heard of you before, and I don't mean this as a shot. Like, I didn't know if you were an honest actor, which you are, or you were just like trying to like, because it's typical amongst some people who have a faith crisis, or at least sometimes pretend to have a faith crisis, and they've already made their decision. They want to leave the church. Like, well, I spoke with Brian Hales to discuss polygamy, or I spoke with, say, Stephen Smoot to discuss the Book of Abraham, and they could not answer my questions. So not knowing you from Adam is like, either this guy's an honest guy and we'll actually have a good conversation, which did take place, or he's just like going to be very difficult to deal with, and I'm going to go a-hole mode. So
yeah, I remember you said that to me after. You were like,
yeah, and it was, and as I said, like it wasn't a personal shot. It's just I never knew you. It was that type of thing.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But hey, look at us now, 2.5 years later.
Yes. Yeah, and we even met up in person before I flew out to the States, so we should definitely try to meet up while I'm still in Europe sometime.
Yeah, no, that would be good. I don't know if I'm going back to Ireland this Christmas because I've been back twice since I moved here. We're planning to do something over here, but we could probably arrange something. Maybe you could always pop over to Preston, tie in
Yeah, I
with
mean,
the
like
temple.
maybe if you have the ear of your bishop or stake president, like you want some like to do a fireside as well, I could always do that, you know.
Aye,
So,
monomodalism.
yes, yes. Yeah, don't worry, class. It'll be very simple. We all know what patrick passion is, so I'm just going to assume everyone knows what that means.
Right.
But you know, as I said, like that was a really fun episode. So I'm kind of glad like people are coming to you and saying like they thought it was good as well. I mean, I'm sure you kind of saw the ranking of Mormon apologists Bridger and Jacob did. Even Jacob kind of mentioned my work on that. So yeah.
What tier did you make? I think I was either A or B. I can't remember.
Yeah, I made like the highest of the A, and the only reason I wasn't S tier is like even Jacob thinks I can be an absolute jerk online. So
you know it sometimes.
Yeah, I'm Irish. I give as good as I get, but I have no complaints. I got hired than Steven Smoot, and that's all that matters.
Oh, did you?
Yes. Okay. So like Smoot was complaining. It's like, oh no, this is just like it's a meme, you know, it's just a joke. And I said like, would you actually say that if you got ranked higher than me, Smoot? We're friends. We can
I remember that they said about my content. I think Bridger said his interviews like are brilliant, but his own episodes, it's death by PowerPoint. I was just like, oh, I was like, that hurts so much.
To be fair, maybe it's because my OCD and stuff like that. Like I do PowerPoint as well, so you know.
My wife tended to agree. I was like, okay. And now I'm trying to go a little bit more off the script, but I still use slides and stuff and pictures or whatever. But thought it was hurtful.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I feel like when I do episodes, I'm like too repetitive and stuff because I'm trying not to use a script. I'm trying to like just like speak from the heart kind of thing. But you have to find a balance of both, really.
Yeah, because I find it's very easy to repeat yourself or ramble. Even if I use a script, I tend to repeat myself. And repetition could be good in some ways because repetition is how you learn and you're trying to emphasize a point. But I remember like in my Book of Mormon series, there's one episode that I did that was like over an hour, and I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. I need to condense and shorten this because sometimes reading too many quotes as well makes them too lengthy.
Jacob is actually Jacob Mayberg's actually chat is like we offended a few people with that episode. Lol.
I wasn't offended though. I took it on board. I was like,
neither was I. In fact, I guest taught a class in not in holiday but near holiday, and Jacob actually attended. It was on the evidences for the Book of Mormon as an authentic document, and we actually just joked about that as well. So yeah, Jacob actually lives in Utah at the moment. So I'm not sure if he actually had. I think he told me like he's been in contact with you, Murph, about coming onto his channel to discuss the bike model.
Yeah, I need to check. I'm not sure if he sent me a message on my other Facebook profile, but he wants to do one on cults as well. Because that's sort of area he's done a lot of work in, and he was on a panel I did as well. So I think that could be a good episode.
I had him on to discuss like mental health issues, like and stuff like that, and he's very good when it comes to that. But when it comes to the bike model, I've seen some of his online stuff, and it's good. I think the bike model is like one of the dumbest things ever because any organization falls into the bike model.
Like it's a spectrum. Yeah, it's a spectrum.
But yeah, that would be a good episode. So yeah, hopefully you can actually reach out to him and get someone on that then.
Yeah, because it's just such an easy thing to say, like it just in such a dismissive way that like, oh, Mormonism is a cult, you know, it's a very easy way to dismiss it. But you can make a similar argument that like when you look up the definition of a cult, like a religious tradition that sort of it's about like centered around either like a leader or some sort of like you know, God, then you're like, and it's got like certain rules or teachings or commandments, and it's like, well, this could apply to a lot of religions. Really, you could classify a lot of religions as cult.
I mean, like Christianity would fall into that. Like you believe that the guy who set it up is actually none other than God himself and all that jazz. So
yeah, I'm sure Jesus was charismatic as well.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So we kind of like discussed like temples and stuff like that. Like any topics you guys have been delving into, any forthcoming episodes or podcasts, or any topics you could be discussing apart from like your potential reaction to the Dublin Ireland Temple, Cameron?
I was curious because I know you mentioned it when we were chatting earlier about the capturing Christianity. I did have a listen to that video he did where he compared Mormonism with Islam and Muhammad. I thought it was a very interesting video. But I don't know. Did you say that you've been trying to see if he'll come on your channel to debate?
Oh no, although I would actually debate him. But Daniel Peterson, I know you've heard of him, Murph. Have you ever heard of Daniel Peterson, Cameron?
Yeah.
Yeah. For those who do not know, he's retired now, but he was professor of Arabic and Islamic studies in BYU. Has a PhD from UCLA in Islamic studies and stuff like that. We've actually been trading some emails over the last few days. He wants to come on to respond and review the larger 45-minute video with the 15 purported parallels between Joseph Smith and Muhammad, Islam, Mormonism. Just trying to find a day.
Good, because that's one of his areas of expertise is Islamic studies.
No, it would be because of all the people in the church. Not only does he know his stuff when it comes to Mormonism, because he's well published in various aspects of LDS scripture and theology and history. For instance, he's been helping with the 8 Days in August documentary that just came out and so forth. He's also an absolute expert when it comes to Islam. I mean, he wrote a peer-reviewed biography of Muhammad that Redmond, a non-LDS academic venue, published. He's working on a book on the cosmology of the Arabic text of the Quran, which hopefully will see the light of day, because I know that will be boring to most people, but I think that would be pretty interesting. He agrees, it's a geocentric cosmology, so it'll be interesting to see how it's received. And a host of other things, he would be the best person to just go through this, because some of the arguments are just really, really stupid.
Some of them were I sort of glossed through it, especially the one about demonic influence, that both Muhammad and Joseph, were experienced demonic influence. Then he talked about the first vision. I was like, is he really making this argument?
It's a really superficial parallel, because if you read early Islamic sources, not only it's Joseph Smith had a confrontation with Satan, he prayed Satan away, and then he saw the first vision.
Yeah,
you compare that with say what earliest Islamic sources state about, say, the very first time Gabriel appeared to Muhammad. Muhammad was convinced it was a jinn, a fire demon, and he actually tried to commit suicide until his wife, who was a non-Orthodox Christian, convinced him it may be of God and so forth. I mean, one of these things is not like the other. Have you ever heard the term parallelomania before?
Yes.
It was just basically that.
Yeah.
And some of these other stuff as well.
Because Joseph Smith, he prayed, he exerted all his powers to call upon God, and then Satan, this darkness was dispersed. And then he mentioned, Jesus was visited by Satan, but that's totally different. It's it was not a good argument that he made.
No, it's not. He's now a Catholic. Now, how much of that is because of devotion? How much of that is because it's a grift? I don't know. But if you actually read, say, the life of Catholic saints and Catholic mystics, they would often have these confrontations with demons and Satan and so forth, and often see the fires of hell. So, again, consistency.
I didn't know he was Catholic. I actually assumed he was Protestant.
He was a Protestant. He became friends with, say, these kind of top-level Catholic apologists like Trent Horn and Matt Fradd and so forth. And his conversion was one of the silliest conversions of all time. For instance, he appeared on Matt Fradd's Pints with Aquinas channel in Rome after he announced his conversion, or hoped to be received in the Catholic Church. It's one thing I love about the Catholic tradition is the prayer life. And then Matt asked him, have you ever said the Hail Mary, or do you know what the Rosary is? And no. Maybe lost in some LDS. So it would be the current, I love, say, the worship of Latter-day Saints, and I love, say, the prayer life. It's so you know all about the temple, and you know about sacrament mean. It's
what's that?
What's that?
You have temples?
I just found, for me, I watched the full 45-minute video, and I think so many of the parallels, I think for me personally, first of all, I think I have a huge issue with the premise, because the way that LDS people view Joseph Smith is completely night and day to how Muslims would view Muhammad. So obviously, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we view Joseph Smith as a prophet and as a restorer. But literally, Muslims view Muhammad as greater than Jesus Christ. And we don't, obviously that's a big stereotype, but we don't view Joseph Smith greater than Jesus Christ, or even close to Jesus Christ. I mean, Joseph Smith himself was always testifying about Christ and Christ's role as the Savior. Never once tried to say that he was greater than Jesus Christ, where Muhammad himself always said that he was the final messenger, that Jesus was preparing the way for him. So even premise.
I would just kind of qualify in terms of his prophetic role greater, because the Quran actually mentions the sins of Muhammad, but seems to believe that Jesus himself was sinless. So
They revere him as a prophet, but obviously not as the Son of God or the
Savior. They don't, for instance, like chapter 4 verse 157 the Quran denies the crucifixion of Christ. To worship Jesus is seen as shirk, because like in Islamic theology, people who go to hell, not everyone who goes to hell will be there eternally as like a purgatorial function for some people, but if you're guilty of shirk, which is basically the unforgivable sin, you're damned forever. And if you read the Quran, it makes like Dante's depiction of hell seem like sane. It's literal fire, it's literal flesh being burnt over and over for eternity. It kind of makes like a lot of the Catholic visionaries like seem very tame when it comes to their depictions of hell, if you're familiar with, say, Fatima and other visionary experiences. But yeah, I mean, and also like Joseph Smith. Oh yeah, granted, like our theology of Jesus does radically differ from, like, say, lowercase o Orthodox, like Eastern and Catholics and so forth. But Joseph Smith never denied that, say, Christ was resurrected, or that he died on the cross, or that he atoned for sins, or he's the divine Son of God, or that he pre-existed. Our theologies of the person and work of Christ are radically different than Islam. And again, it's really parallelomania. And it's really popular because like this whole like parallel between Islam and Mormonism and Joseph and Muhammad, it's been like a staple since the 19th century. It's really guilt by association, because like you think of, if you're especially an evangelical or a normie Roman Catholic, which is the predominant audience of his channel, Islam bad and so forth, So, and Muhammad, false prophet, So once you try and parallel them with Joseph Smith, because like, they both practice polygamy and so forth, like, okay, well, there must be these kind of child lovers and stuff like that. Like, and some of these arguments are just really silly, because we do have the prophecy of Joseph, the son of Joseph, in 2 Nephi 2 and JST Genesis 50, and he keeps saying like Joseph appealed to this as proof that he was a prophet of God and so on and so forth. But like, as James Fordor, who's an atheist, and he's ex-LDS, has kind of noted, there's no evidence in the historical record that Joseph actually used these prophecies as proof or evidence of his prophetic calling.
Yeah.
Now, LDS do say, like, yes, he's the prophesied Joseph, son of Joseph, who would translate the record. That's the predominant LDS view. But I'm unaware, like, anyone, including Joseph Smith, who said, like, well, of course I'm a prophet of God, because, like, 2 Nephi 3 and JST, Genesis 50, prophesied of me.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think, Robert, as well, about the Messiah ben Joseph tradition? I've not looked too deeply into it. I remember, like, reading an article about it, that in some, like, it's attributed to Joseph of Egypt, like, prophecy, like a latter-day restorer called Messiah ben Joseph. And
yeah, I'm aware of the traditions. Some LDS who I have respect for, like John Trenton, who's unfortunately deceased, and a few others like Matthew Brown, they discussed, like, say, these Joseph, son of Joseph stuff, but with the exception of Trenton, who actually knew the languages, a lot of people were relying on, like, say, English translations and a few other things as well, which are not accurate. There is, like, a legitimate tradition about a Messiah, son of Joseph, and there's, like, traditions about a Messiah, son of David. But actually, on my podcast, I actually have an interview with Alan Hansen, who's originally from Israel. He knows, like, the Hebrew and Arabic language sources like the back of his hand. It doesn't. I try to give as much respect and honor to Joseph Smith as is proper. I just don't believe he's the Messiah, son of Joseph, or that he fulfilled it. I think there's a lot of parallelomania going on. Now, the discussions are very interesting. Like, the tradition about Messiah, son of Joseph is interesting. But as Alan in the podcast, and if you just type in either Alan Hansen or Messiah, son of Joseph into my channel, you'll see the interview. It just, not without, like, a lot of special pleading and a lot of stretching, can you claim Messiah, son of Joseph traditions were fulfilled in the person of Joseph Smith. It seems like, say, the Messiah, son of Joseph was...
Jesus fulfilled both then? Messiah,
yes, I do believe. Now, you will find, like, say, some Jewish traditions, like the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, where there's, like, a numerical distinction between these Messiah, son of Joseph, and Messiah, son of David. So there's actually two different Messiahs. But there's some traditions that actually believe it's one and the same. And I think if there is, like, a legitimate strand of Messiah, son of David, it was fulfilled in the same person, i.e. Jesus. I don't believe that Joseph Smith fulfilled these traditions, as much as I respect, like, the late Matthew Brown and John Trenton. Now, the discussion, like, say, the traditions themselves are pretty good, but their application to the person of Joseph Smith, I think, to be stretches.
Okay. I need to look more into that.
But definitely check out the podcast episode. I know Trenton was working on a book on the traditions about Messiah, son of Joseph, but he died 6 years ago, so I'm not sure if he'll ever see the light of day. And unfortunately, like, a lot of people, with the exception of Trenton's, like Matthew Brown and Cleon Skousen, who reference it in one of his 1,000-year books as well, and a few others like Joseph Fielding and McConkie, they were reliant upon like either what they heard from articles or like some articles and some books that were translations or summarizations of the original language texts. And if you were to go through the original language texts themselves, they're often very late, they're very questionable in some portions as well, and the original language texts don't really support a very good one-to-one transposition with the life and times of Joseph Smith. So as I said, like I try to give as much respect to Joseph Smith as he's properly due. I just don't believe it fits Joseph Smith.
Okay. I thought, because I believe that prophecy in 2 Nephi 3, it's attributed, because that chapter is quoting from Joseph of Egypt from the prophet. So that's where I thought, oh, maybe there could have been something to that tradition. But you think it's parallelomania?
I just don't believe it holds up either for 2 Nephi 3 specifically, or Joseph Smith and the Messiah son of Joseph traditions. I just believe it's coincidental that Joseph, the prophetic Joseph, is mentioned. Now, like there's a debate, like is these Joseph
sometime?
Yeah, definitely.
That'll be fun to cover.
But another thing is like, was Joseph Smith actually the fulfillment of 2 Nephi 3? And I think a case could be made he did, but there's actually, funny enough, like a strand in restorationist thought that prophecy was not actually fulfilled with Joseph Smith. It's going to be fulfilled by a end times Lamanite prophet. Like David Whitmer held to that interpretation. And if you ever heard of the Bickernites, the Church of Jesus Christ, like the third largest restorationist group, that's actually their functional interpretation of 2 Nephi 3 as well. Really? That it's not about, they don't believe the Joseph, son of Joseph in 2 Nephi chapter 3 is actually about Joseph Smith. They actually believe it's about a Lamanite prophet who will be called Joseph, who will have a very important role in the end times.
Interesting.
And some like members of the old or LDS church who wrote in defense of that interpretation as well. So it's a minority report to be sure, but like I don't agree with your arguments, but at the same time, like it's not necessarily like a stretch as some may think it is. Like for instance, like it mentions like Lehi, like how this Joseph will be amongst his seed and so forth. And there's some like interpretive issues as well that could lend its way to that interpretation. So I disagree with it. I do believe it's fulfilled in the translator of the record that we have now, and it was through the person of Joseph Smith.
Yeah, that's how I always read it.
And that's the standard LDS interpretation. But at the same time, like it's not a nutty interpretation. Like it has something going for it. Like there is like a strand of thought in 19th century LDS thought, like David Whitmer, the Bickenites, some or LDS, and there are some things in the text that would lend itself to a plausible interpretation of that. And it could be like some prophecies where there's a dual fulfillment. You know, there could be like, it was like an immediate fulfillment with Joseph Smith, but like a remote fulfillment in a very similar type of Joseph Smith with a Lamanite prophet as well. So, you know, it could be like both and, but who knows?
There's a couple of things from the video he watched. There's a couple of points he made that one, I thought like it was such a double standard, or it was just like a weak argument. Like one, like it's such a common argument about like the plates, like nobody saw the plates, he translated them and they just gave them back. And like he didn't even acknowledge that we have witnesses of the gold plates, the 3 and the 8 witnesses, and then other like unofficial witnesses who held the plates covered in a cloth. But then like you could also make the same argument that like, oh well, only the 12 disciples and Mary and a few others saw Jesus's resurrection. Like we can't empirically verify that as well. So I kind of felt like it was a bit of a double standard.
From purely historical perspective, there's more evidence for the witnesses of the gold plates and their heavenly physical tangible event than there is for the resurrection. And this comes out like, say, during the Horn-Hansen debate on the Book of Mormon, where, for instance, like in 1 Corinthians, let me preface, like the resurrection's a historical event, deal with it. But with that being said, like in 1 Corinthians 15, there's like this early creedal statement, like how Christ was seen by 500 people.
We've got no names.
It's a bold assertion. So I believe it happened, but it's not based on historical evidence. It's more like a faith commitment based, informed by other things. And I do believe, like say, the gospel accounts are pretty accurate eyewitness testimony, a la Richard Balkin. But do we actually have the first-hand statements to say Mary or the other women? No, we actually have reports of it and so forth. But we actually have, when it comes to the witnesses, not just the signed statements, but their testimony even after many left the church. that yes, they actually had a tangible experience with the plates and or Moroni and or the other artifacts as well. You don't have that with the resurrection of Christ. And even some atheists like Richard Packham, who passed away a few months ago, I should say, like he was a militant anti-LDS person on ORFM. He did say, like, when he was reviewing Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ, there's actually more historical evidence for the witnesses and the angel Moroni than there is for the resurrection of Christ. And from a purely historical perspective, there is.
Yeah, and that's Josh Gailey, I think, argued that in his book, and Steve Pinecker, who I had on my channel, we discussed the Book of Mormon. I don't know if it's okay for me to mention his name.
Go ahead.
Had some
no, it's fine.
Even he, as an evangelical Christian, showed some intellectual consistency to say there is better evidence for the witnesses of the gold plates than the witnesses of Christ's resurrection, and that is coming from an evangelical Christian.
Yeah, and even like secular critics like Dan Vogel and even Fawn Brody, no man knows my history, has basically conceded a lot of points where basically, Joseph had a physical artifact that were 40 to 60 pounds in weight. They don't believe they were genuine artifacts, but he somehow managed to like fool people with these kind of plates. So much so, like there was a fellow by the name of Rob Bowman who wrote a book trying to critique like the first vision and Joseph's experiences, but defend the historicity of the resurrection. He basically said, like, to paraphrase, even if there was an artifact, like the witnesses were not trained in ancient metallurgy and ancient linguistics. So they had no real idea if what they were examining was like ancient text and an ancient artifact. And it's like, really?
Yeah. Well, like I understand that argument, but at least to them, you at least say that it passed visual inspection. Them, it looked ancient and fine characters of curious workmanship. So you at least have to say that Joseph created plates with fine characters on that passed visual inspection, which just makes the fraud very impressive. So, like, I guess,
and we don't have any good historical record that he's working on forging plates pre Book of Mormon project.
Yeah, it's just that's almost as hard to believe that he manufactured plates, which is why I think so many critics try to state that like they saw the plates covered in a cloth, because I don't think they believe. Because whenever I did my response episode to John DeLynne's LDS Discussions episode, it was funny because John at the end was like, because they were talking about like what's their conclusion or their theory on the 8 witnesses, and then Mike and I can't remember the other co-host were leaning more towards it was like spiritual viewing. But then John was like, but wait, what about all these statements where they're like, we saw and handled the plates and we saw the engravings? I'm like, yes, John, yes. And then they were just like, oh no, we think it was spiritualized or covered in a cloth. And there's maybe like only 1 or 2 like second, third hand statements that might support that, but the vast majority support them seeing and handling in line with their official testimonies.
Yeah,
and John said that I don't believe Joseph could have fabricated plates that they're describing, so it must have been covered in a cloth. I'm just like, no. I'm like, you were nearly there. But I don't think they believe he could have fabricated plates with the appearance of gold with characters on it as they described. So that's why most critics say it was covered in a cloth, but the majority of their statements don't support that.
Yeah, and like even like say the late like third hand Merhin saw them with their spiritual eyes. Like if you were to examine what the term spiritual eyes meant, it meant like a event that could be physical and tangible, but was in a religious context as well in the 18th and 19th century. Like you have believing biblical commentators saying like the apostles had a physical experience of Christ, but they had that with their spiritual eyes. It's not like an either or false dichotomy as well. And like Neil Rappley has done a lot of, and Stephen Smoot has done a lot of work on that.
Did you watch the episode we did on the Burnett Ladder?
Yeah, on the Burnett Ladder in the Fetchcraft for Daniel Pearson, Neil had a very good essay on the term spiritual eyes and how Merhin Harris used it. And he's also done excellent work with Jerry Grover and Josh Coates on the dimensions and weight of the plates and so forth. So
yeah.
I mean, unless Christian, one of the things, like there's a book coming out by John Turner on Joseph Smith, and at MHA a few months ago, he basically said he doesn't believe that it was a physical artifact. He believes that it was just a spiritual experience, but it was just as real and tangible for people at the time. And have you ever heard of Thomas Alexander, the historian?
I've maybe heard of him, but I don't know.
He wrote a book like Mormonism in Transition and stuff like that. He's pretty well known in LDS circles. He was actually in the audience. He ended up and just like from memory quote the testimony of the 8 witnesses to Turner.
And people like Emma Smith as well.
Yeah.
Who felt and moved the plates when she was dusting that they're pliable like paper. So how do you account for those people? Like there were certainly metal plates there. Like there's so many people that talk about feeling and hefting the plates Joseph Knight Sr., Josiah stole. So that doesn't.
And again,
that
like
doesn't
a
work.
number of these people became hostile witnesses as well. It's not like, say, they were all in the gig. I mean, David Whitmer, he died in 1888, and like in 1887, he wrote a book, An Address to All Believers in Christ, where the second half of the book is basically Brighamism bad, Sidney Rigdon effed things up, there was no two priesthoods, Joseph Smith became a fallen prophet. Opening couple of chapters, like Book of Mormon is true, I saw the angel, there were physical artifacts, deal with it.
Yeah.
And like the following year when he died, he mentioned like his testimony was engraved in his tombstone.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. No, and so like in that video, I felt like, and we're not dissing on like I believe the disciples' testimony of the resurrection.
Oh yeah, same here.
Dissing on that, but like if you're gonna say that that's strong evidence for Jesus' resurrection, but then reject the witnesses of the gold plates, like it's a real double standard.
Yeah.
And one of the other points he made, which I was just kind of like, what? And I have to go in a few minutes. I'll sort of like make this one of my final points.
Oh no, it's good. We can end soon anyway.
How like Jesus didn't like create new scripture, but he just like, he just believed in the scripture that was there. And it was like Joseph took the easy route by making his own scripture. And I was like really? Like making his own set of templates, dictating 270,000 words, 588 pages, all the complexity that's in the Book of Mormon in under 85 days. Like that was him taking the easy route. Like
and also, didn't Jesus inspire the New Testament? Like if you read the Book of Revelation, guess who's actually giving the revelation? Jesus.
Right.
And like it would be so much easier if Joseph just claimed to be like a Martin Luther. It's like, I'm going to reform and restore the church, without like creating new scripture. And there was like other restorationist groups like Alexander Campbell's movement and later John Thomas's movement, where they still believe in the cessation of revelation. They just believe that passively God raised them up to restore the church. It would have been so much friggin' easier than go about this whole rigmarole with the Book of Mormon and later the Doctrine and Covenants, or the Book of Commandments originally, and the Book of Abraham and all this jazz as well. In fact, creating new scripture would have been very detrimental to any new religious movement because of the very strong Protestant assumptions.
It would have been easier to not have created new scripture, but say, oh, I'm a prophet, we're just going to use the Bible. Like he took the easy route by dictating the Book of Mormon. Like that does not make any sense. That's a bad argument.
And again, Jesus, yes, he accepted the Old Testament, but what happened to that movement? They received the New Testament, unless of course he's going to claim, like say, the Gospels and the Epistles are just historical works of importance, like the Shepherd of Hermas or First Clement, but they're not divinely inspired scripture. Like how many Protestants think about the deuterocanonical or the apocryphal books? Like they may not necessarily be inspired, but like they're useful for historical information or bridging the gap between the testaments. But as a Catholic, he can't hold to that. He has to believe in their full plenary inspiration.
Right.
And of course, that came after, the Old Testament.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Double standards and silly arguments galore.
With Dan Peterson. Going through some of that. I'm gonna have to go here in a minute because
that's good.
Yet, but I think you did ask about any upcoming things on my channel.
Yeah.
I'm still doing my series on temples and masonry. I've got, I think, an interesting upcoming episode and just showing some parallels and connections between our temple endowment and priestly initiations and coronation ceremonies of monarchs. And I thought it was kind of cool because that's one of the purposes of our temple endowment, to become kings and priests unto God. And it's interesting, some of the connections. And I've got an interview being released with Brian Hales on Was Joseph a Polygamist? And I thought it was quite thorough, deep dive. And then in part 2, we talk about just different issues or questions with regards to like DNC 132 and other questions people have about the doctrine of polygamy. And then had a long episode with Jerry Grover on the gold plates. So we go over
great.
the plate dimension of the plates, and he responds specifically to John Lundwall and then Trent Horn as well.
Awesome.
So I'll probably split it into 2 parts because it's quite lengthy. But at the end, I felt like, okay, he made his own set of plates. Like he tested.
Oh no! Like he would often. He actually had a very lengthy meeting with my former boss, and he actually showed us, like, say, some of the plates he was making and like the process of making it. Like, because of his background in like earth sciences and geology, he'd be one of the best persons to actually know about this. And of course, like he wrote that really good SIF book as well. Yeah,
like I can't believe he actually did it. To be honest, like copper like coated with gold to test it, and he showed it to me as well. He's like, oh yeah, you can engrave on it. So yeah, I've got that coming up. But just want to say it was fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, hopefully we can actually try to make this like a regular-ish thing. So I'll reach out. Yeah.
I'll see you later, Cameron.
Have a great week ahead.
Right. 0
So, into that, any other thing you want to discuss, like any forthcoming video or videos you're hoping to produce, or that's in the pipeline in terms of being edited and so forth?
Yeah, so I mean, well, I was going to say, I'll just add very quickly to what we were talking about there with this video on the capturing Christianity. I think I just basically to echo what Stephen was talking about, I just find it hilarious. I felt that whole video, although it was 45 minutes, was quite long. For me, it was just such a class A example of like typical anti, where it was like so many things that are so nuanced and so complicated and need discussion and need like a back and forth to talk about. Like a lot of these antis, they just state it as matter of fact in like one sentence, and then they just move on as if like that's it, that's all there is to say about it. And so I felt that so many of the things that he brought up were like actually things that are worth diving into and talking about. Like one of the points he made was the discontinuity in the physical form of God, and how both Muslims and Mormons believe in like a physical God, and again he just like left it in such a brief way and then just moved on. But like again, like it's one of those things that when you're actually willing to talk about it, it's like one of the biggest questions I always say when it comes up to this situation is, do you believe Jesus is a God? If you believe Jesus is a God, does Jesus have a body? And then like again, it just turns this whole conversation on its head. But I just felt so much of it was just I felt there was a lot of like hypocrisy and double standards. Like at one point, one of the points he made was about like private revelations and how both Joseph Smith and Muhammad had all these private revelations, but Jesus Christ never did. And it's like, oh, did Christ not go to the wilderness? Is there not like all these scriptures that say Christ went and prayed on his own?
And he's a Roman Catholic. He believes like private revelations can be like exalted or like elevated, like Fatima and Lourdes and all these other official approved Marian apparitions. So again, double standards, my guy. Like true prophets can still receive on a personal level revelation, so. But yeah, as you said, like the temptation in the wilderness, that kind of refutes the demonic possession argument and also personal private revelation. So.
Yeah, exactly. And again, when you're going to make the parallel between Joseph Smith and Muhammad, Joseph Smith had a demonic encounter, but he never said that he was possessed by it, nor did he ever blame, a false doctrine or a false teaching on being possessed by something,
Nor did he try to off himself as a result of it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so the private revelations, and then the whole point about like new scripture. Well, first of all, okay, so he talks about supernatural abilities, being able to translate, and he brings up Urim and Thummim, and he says it in even like a joking, sarcastic way. And it's like literally the words Urim and Thummim is found in the Old Testament. Like he brings it up as if it's like just this thing.
Here's the thing. Have you seen the video short I shared where Cameron is having an interview with an Egyptologist, and he doesn't actually understand like the tabernacle in the old. He wasn't having an interview with Dr. Falk, who's an Egyptologist, and they were talking about like the temple structures and stuff like that. He did not know about the Old Testament tabernacle. He did not know who built the first temple. He even admitted like he's very ignorant of the Old Testament. So I'm not. If it's a case like he doesn't actually know that the term Urim and Thummim, let alone they're being used in a divinatory sense in the Old Testament, appears in the Bible, I would not actually be too surprised. He's really ignorant. So he himself, he's guessed to know their stuff when it comes to particular topics, but Cameron is theologically low IQ.
Yeah. This is my problem with a lot of the arguments, is that they are so, if you have any kind of understanding, like for example, I think one of the things that really refutes so many of his points, because it was 15. Okay, so he said 15 parallels between Joseph and Muhammad. Really, it was about 10 or 11, and then he just broke down polygamy into like 4 different parallels, even though they all come under the umbrella of polygamy. So really, several of the 10 or 11, the first few, can all be done away with if you know anything about Margaret Barker. If you know anything about the fact that there's Deuteronomists, if you know anything about the fact that like the Old Testament has been heavily edited, and that there's so much of the apocryphal work that should have been in it isn't in it. Even the Savior himself like quoted apocryphal work that isn't in the actual canon that we have today. And so again,
to be fair though, I'd be a little cautious about like Margaret Barker. She tends to like overstate her case quite a bit.
Fair point. But even if you have an understanding that is a conversation that's currently going on about the way the Old Testament was edited, the records that we have now, how they're put together, if you know that there's even a debate to be had about that and what the content was, I think one of the biggest things is like, especially as like LDS, when we're talking about like our theology and that we believe that like God has a physical glorified body, one of the biggest anachronisms that we always point to, or at least I've always pointed to, is the fact that in the Old Testament, in one chapter, Moses is talking to God face to face, and in the next chapter it says you can't see God you can't see God's face and live. And so it's like already in the Old Testament, there's some anachronisms about like the being of God and how it works. But like, and then when you think about like the fact that it refers all the time throughout all scripture to God's throne, why would God have a throne if he wasn't a physical being who could sit in it? I just think there's so many nuances that are worth having in these conversations that he just simply dismissed by saying God is spirit, full stop.
To be fair, like, yeah, as a Catholic now, he would hold it like classical theism. So, you know, it would be like an anthropomorphism. It's more like, say, a way of expressing God's incomprehensible, you know, being to us. So he doesn't actually have a throne. That's only like, say, anthropomorphic language to help communicate what's going on. But the problem is, like, when it comes to those texts in Exodus, they're historical narrative. They're not poetical. And they're describing, like, say, events where, like, yeah, Moses can't see the face of God and live. But he can see his back parts and stuff like that. Like, what's the anthropomorphic function of back parts? Again, God is seen as like clearly three-dimensional in his essential being in the Old Testament. But and when it comes to like, the Old Testament, again, if he's a consistent Roman Catholic, Rome spoke officially at the Council of Trent, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Or basically, as Trent Horn put his argument number 4 against Jacob Hansen, Roman Catholicism is a true church, ergo the Book of Mormon is false.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, and I appreciate you brought up the debate between Jacob Hansen and Trent Horn earlier, because that's exactly what I was thinking, is that this idea, especially regarding the witnesses, is that like so many of the arguments made against Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon, you can use the exact same arguments to dismiss Christ and the resurrection. And so I do think it's just such a double standard. And then the last thing I'll say about polygamy, I mean, like I said, he broke polygamy down into like 4 different points when really it was all under the same umbrella. I find this is one of my problems with him and like the likes of like Michelle Stone and a lot of these people who are, you know, somewhat obsessed with the topic of polygamy, is that they always resorted back to it being like this really sexual thing and that it was all about sex. And like there are no records. Like Joseph Smith was a fruitful guy. Him and Emma had many children. Now some of those children didn't make it. Some of those children passed away, but they had many children. There isn't a single record. I think from what I've read, there's arguably potentially one potential child that might have been Joseph's.
Yeah, but all those that have been tested through like genetics have been shown not to be Joseph's kids.
Exactly. So. And then all these other wives.
But you know the response by some to that, right?
Yeah.
That John Bennett was his personal abortion doctor.
Yeah.
Which there's no historical evidence for that, but yeah,
absolutely zero. So again, I think that's my problem with polygamy, is that like from a faithful LDS perspective, we understand that like Joseph's motivations with polygamy was the idea of eternal families and being sealed as families. And to the point where even, and like a lot of people don't know this, but like Joseph Smith was sealed to men because it wasn't, again, you know, that clearly takes out the sexuality of it, because clearly it was based on this idea of like, in order to become like God, which is part of our theology, we believe in the importance of sealing and of families being eternal. And so Joseph Smith was learning about this concept, line upon line, precept upon precept, just like all of us do. And so as he's learning about it, he's understanding the importance of it. He's trying to put it into action. He's trying to make it happen, even with men, not only women, not only young women, old women, like women of different ages, women in different status. So my problem with all the polygamous debate is that like so many people always try to just drive it down to it was all about sex. And like there is little to no evidence that is what it was about. When really, if you actually study, you know, Joseph Smith's writings, you have to actually study the writings of those around him. It was very focused on this idea of like eternal families, like being sealed so that you have that connection even beyond death. Like that was Joseph.
Have you read or listened to anything on Joseph's polygamy by either Brian Hills or Don Bradley?
Yeah, I've watched a couple Don Bradley stuff.
Okay.
And I think I listened to like a review on Hales. It was a while ago now. I think it was like right after.
Oh no, it's just making sure, because like they would be probably the best people to pursue on the topic of Joseph's polygamy. And of course, like Ugo Prego has done a lot of work with non-LDS on the genetics of these purported kids. So, but yeah.
Yeah, good to know. Cool. Anyway, so for me, myself, I mean, upcoming stuff, I have a couple of stuff planned, a couple of stuff that I've started to organize. I hope to do a couple more interviews. I would like to, I'm hopefully setting up some of my first debates, but it's still very early days. I kind of want to do something a little bit different. I kind of want to like bring on people who are just like normal members of the church, who like maybe post something on their Facebook that I can tell they have like a very strong opinion about something. And and I want to try and invite them on to like have a discussion about it. Like I want to try bring people on that are just like normal members in the pews or less actives or whatever their situation might be, rather than people that are like more versed in this influencer world and like social media. I want to bring on, like, there's a couple of people I have on my Facebook that they've put up some interesting comments or statuses in the last couple of months. And those are kind of people that I like want to reach out and say like, hey, would you be interested on like coming on my YouTube channel and like having a conversation about this for other people to listen to? Because obviously other people might have the same stance as you are. So that's some of the things that I'm trying to put in the works now.
So would they be? So would that be like the debates you would like want to do?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it would be more kind of conversational debates, not so much like a formal debate.
Yeah.
But just I feel like one of the problems with like so many people when they start going down that path of like turning against the church or going through a faith crisis or whatever it is, I feel like there isn't anyone who's willing to have like a healthy pushback conversation with them. Like they just spiral, they get onto Mormon stories or whatever they get onto, and they just spiral. And like very few of these people, at least from what I've listened to, because I've listened to a couple of the Mormon stories episodes, I have a lot of friends that have left the church. Very few of them have ever said that there was someone in their life who was willing to sit down and talk to them about like Joseph Smith's polygamy or the history of the church or whatever it might be, or blacks in the priesthood. Like there's very few people. And obviously when they're going down that spiral, they're not searching like, what do faithful LDS people think about blacks in the priesthood? They're not looking that up. They're just spiraling into the anti. And so for me, it's like I want to try and find opportunities where like people are starting that spiral from things I can see they're posting or comments they're making. And I want to try like catch them in that and say like, hey, like come on my channel, let's have like an open conversation about this where like other people can learn from it too. And like obviously if I'm inviting you on my channel, I'm not doing it like I'm not trying to be a bad actor. Like obviously I want to have an open conversation about it. So a bit of a different take on like the kind of debating side of things. And then I do have a couple of just like personal videos that I'm trying to do now. I want to try and address, my thing is like I want to go after like the more controversial things. Like I want to do some videos addressing like LGBTQ and the church and like the doctrine regarding members of the church who are openly gay or whatever it might be, and like kind of flesh those things out in a video. And then hopefully that'll cause like some comments to come up and some debates, and maybe that could even turn into someone wanting to come on the channel and talk about these things. But anyway, a few different things. Nothing crazy and concrete like our friend the Murph has there. He's got quite an agenda set up.
He's busy.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. What about yourself? Have you got anything coming up?
Hopefully in September, I will have an Italian member of the church come on. She gave a presentation at the Italian Fair Conference on the penal substitutionary model of atonement and how that's incompatible with Latter-day Saint theology and thought. So that'll be a fun one. And of course, like I'll have Dan Peterson on hopefully in the next few weeks to go through Cameron Bertuzzi's video on parallels between Joseph Smith, Mormonism, Islam, and Muhammad. So that'll be fun. And maybe a couple others. I know Blake Oster will be coming on to critique classical theism, basically Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways, and a couple of other things as well. So I'll see.
Nice. Cool. All right. Well, I got to head out here as well now. But,
no, that's fine. But hopefully we can actually try to make this like a regular-ish, like if not every weekend, maybe like every second weekend, where we can just like have a few topics to discuss and see how it goes.
Yeah, just shoot from the hip. I like it.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
But yeah, thanks for coming on. And for those who have listened live or will listen afterwards, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully this has been informative.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully I'll catch you and the Murph and maybe a few other European content creators in the near future as well. So take care.
Definitely.
Have a great weekend.